The Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics will come to order. Good afternoon and welcome to today's hearing entitled The Emerging Commercial Suborbital Reusable Launch Vehicle Market. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and truth and testimony disclosure for today's witness panel. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I would like to thank our many witnesses for agreeing to testify before our subcommittee. I know that considerable effort goes into your preparation, and I want to thank you for taking the time to appear today to share your knowledge with us. Today's hearing will look at the emerging commercial suborbital reusable launch vehicle market. Suborbital vehicles can cross the thresholds of space and travel in the upper reaches of the atmosphere, typically above 62 miles for brief periods of time, but not orbit the Earth. Our hearing will provide an opportunity to receive testimony from researchers, market analysts, and some of the companies that are vying to build the vehicles to compete in this emerging marketplace. We're going to learn about a newly released 10-year forecast of market demand. Many in the research community are hopeful to exploit the unique microgravity environment of suborbital flight with economical, routine access that enables expanded human research, atmospheric research, and microgravity, biological, and physical research. Space tourism proponents are optimistic that a safe operational system will be developed to support their business ambitions. Yet there are significant technical, financial, and regulatory challenges to be overcome before these hopes can be realized. Companies can perform test flights with an experimental permit from the FAA, but cannot sell their services and become full-fledged commercial entities without first obtaining an FAA launch and reentry license. In addition, current law prohibits the FAA from issuing regulations on human spaceflight until October 2015. Until then, the FAA will engage with industry participants who can share their views on how to improve safety without proposing burdensome regulations. I encourage industry to work closely with the FAA so that they will be able to draft effective regulations in 2015 and diminish the chance that these regulations will stifle the industry. I look forward to hearing from our experts about their plans to develop a profitable and sustainable business. It is my hope they will be successful bringing these new markets into the mainstream, recognizing that the commercial suborbital launch vehicle business faces significant technical challenges as new designs are introduced. I'm optimistic they will perform safely and profitably while reducing costs and increasing the quality of suborbital research. We have a lot of ground to cover today. I want to thank our witnesses again. I look forward to today's discussion. I now recognize Ms. Edwards for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief. I also join you in thanking the witnesses and also thanking them for their patience. Sometimes our schedules are a little bit unpredictable. But I want to welcome all of our witnesses because I anticipate that this is going to be a really interesting and informative hearing on the emerging commercial suborbital transportation market. Mr. Chairman, this subcommittee has been heavily involved in commercial space transportation issues, including suborbital systems. Clearly can't say that. It's also clear that developing commercial suborbital systems has been a challenging undertaking. At a 2003 Joint House-Senate hearing on commercial space transportation, companies predicted that commercial suborbital flights could be anticipated as early as 2006. A few years later, at a hearing held by this subcommittee in April 2005, an industry representative estimated that service could begin in 2008 or 2009. Based on the prepared statements provided by the industry witnesses, I'm encouraged by the progress that's being made by competing designs, and I look forward to continuing accomplishments. I'd like to also better understand what challenges this emerging industry has encountered in getting to where it is today and what hurdles remain. And further, I hope to hear from our witnesses on what challenges have been overcome, what opportunities lie ahead, the potential impacts on NASA research activities, and what steps will be needed to ensure that this can be done safely, and I would add to that what it is that this Congress needs to do to ensure your success. And so thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. If there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce our panel of witnesses, and then we will proceed to hear from each of them in order. Our first witness is Ms. Carissa Christensen, a founder and managing partner of the Tari Group, an analytic consulting firm based in Alexandria, Virginia. Ms. Christensen is a recognized expert with over 25 years of experience in the analysis of space systems, industry economics, regulatory requirements, and underlying demand. Our next witness is Dr. Alan Stern. Dr. Stern is an Associate Vice President at the Southwest Research Institute, and in 2011 was appointed Director of the Florida Space Institute. Dr. Stern is the Principal Investigator of NASA's Pluto Kuiper Belt mission, and in 2000 and 2008 he served as the Associate Administrator of NASA's Science Mission Directorate. Our next witness is Mr. George Whitesides, the CEO and President of Virgin Galactic, the space tourism company founded by Sir Richard Branson. Prior to Virgin Galactic, Mr. Whitesides served as Chief of Staff of the current NASA Administrator, and before that as Executive Director of the National Space Society. Our next witness is Mr. Brett Alexander, Director of Business Development and Strategy for Blue Origin, a developer of human spaceflight systems founded by Amazon.com's Jeff Bezos. Prior to that, Mr. Alexander was the chair of the Commercial Space Committee of the NASA Advisory Council. Since 2008, Mr. Alexander has served as a member of the FAA's Commercial Space Transportation Advisory Committee, COMSTAC. Our next witness is Mr. Andrew Nelson, Chief Operating Officer and Vice President of Business Development for Xcor Aerospace. Mr. Nelson originated the space vehicle wet lease concept that is at the heart of Xcor's market strategy. Prior to Xcor, Mr. Nelson spent approximately 15 years in the aerospace sector and a total of 9 years with two Wall Street firms, Morgan Stanley and Lehman Brothers. The last witness on our panel, Dr. Stephen McCandless, is a research professor at the Johns Hopkins University Department of Physics and Astronomy and is currently principal investigator of a sounding rocket program. Since coming to the Johns Hopkins University, he has launched 15 sounding rocket-borne far UV spectroscopic instruments. Dr. McCandless has been principal investigator and co-investigator on several NASA grants to develop space mission technologies and served as a member of NASA's Sounding Rocket Working Group from 1999 to 2003. Welcome to you all. As our witnesses should know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes each. After all witnesses have spoken, members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. I now recognize our first witness, Ms. Christensen, for 5 minutes. Mike, please.
I do apologize. Chairman Palazzo, Congresswoman Edwards, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today on emerging markets for suborbital reusable vehicles. On a personal note, it's an honor to be part of this to be testifying today. I've spent my career in commercial space, and I'm delighted that Congress is interested in this important subject. My firm, the Torrey Group, recently completed a 6-month study to forecast 10-year demand for suborbital reusable vehicles, or SRVs. The FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation and Space Florida jointly funded the study. Our purpose was to develop an objective and rigorous forecast of SRV demand and market dynamics. Equally importantly, we sought to identify the ways current realities could change, positively or negatively, in order to help decision makers understand and manage future outcomes. Our research and analysis focused process included 120 interviews, assessing budgets, market studies, and other data, and surveying more than 200 high net worth individuals who can afford current prices for suborbital flights. We use this data to develop our forecast and to describe future uncertainties and our assumptions about them. My testimony describes results of that study. Our study concluded that demand for SRV flights at current prices is genuine, sustained, and appears sufficient to support multiple providers. We estimate baseline demand reflecting predictable trends that exist today at about 400 to 500 seat equivalents each year for people and for cargo. Our growth scenario sees that number triple. Our constrained scenario sees it halved. Additional potential demand is possible from unknowns, such as research discoveries, commercial applications, or viral consumer response. Price reductions would also increase demand. The largest market by far in our analysis is commercial human spaceflight for individuals. We estimated at more than 80% of the total. Given current prices, most of these individuals will be wealthy. Many will be from outside the United States. These individuals enable a new SRV industry with capabilities that can benefit researchers, educators, and others. Specifically, we identified 5 additional markets active in our 10-year forecast period: basic and applied research, aerospace technology test and demonstration, satellite deployment, education, and media and public relations. Our baseline for these markets shows initial demand for about 30 seat equivalents that grows to 130 annually. Our constraint scenario grows more slowly, and our growth scenario increases to nearly 400 seat equivalents, representing thousands of payloads. As of this moment, purchases of SRV services in most of these markets have already begun. SRVs have unique capabilities for basic and applied research. We identified currently funded research areas that are better served by SRVs than by existing alternatives. We predicted some of the funding in these areas would shift to SRVs. These areas are atmospheric research of the poorly understood upper reaches of the atmosphere that affect weather and climate, suborbital astronomy, to get access to infrared and ultraviolet observations from outside the atmosphere, longitudinal human research on space travelers to understand things like vascular and immune response to microgravity and acceleration, and microgravity research where the unique combination of SRV capabilities may energize the research community and attract new organizations. SRVs can also be used for test and demonstration of certain types of technology and may also serve as launchers for small satellites, which are increasingly used for research. Finally, our analysis suggests SRVs may be widely used for STEM education. Student-built projects can fly to space and return. Frequent launches align with academic calendars, and schools can likely afford SRV prices for small payloads. Based on analogous hands-on STEM programs, we estimate that after 10 years, as many as 600 K through 12 schools and more than 100 universities could be flying small student payloads. SRVs will create a different kind of space transportation industry than we have seen before. This space marketplace will be heavily influenced by individual consumers, with government potentially around 1/10 of total demand. An important regulatory challenge is developing an effective approach for these unprecedented new dynamics. In closing, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I now recognize Dr. Stern for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you. Chairman Palazzo, Congresswoman Edwards, and members of the subcommittee, thank you again for the opportunity to meet with you today. I'm a planetary scientist, and I've used suborbital sounding rockets since the 1980s. I've been a principal investigator on numerous NASA missions, and I served, as you said, as Associate Administrator responsible for the Science Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters. I'm the current chairman of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation's SARG, or Suborbital Applications Researchers Group. Mr. Chairman, in 1946, when the U.S. Army formed its Rocket Research Panel to determine how researchers could best exploit the capabilities of captured German V-2 rockets, only a tiny fraction of the nation's scientists were aware of the powerful impact that suborbital rockets could have on their research. After all, few scientists of that era had ever before had access to space launch capability of any kind. Yet barely a decade later, rocket-borne research had become so powerful a tool that it formed the centerpiece of 1957's landmark International Geophysical Year. In 2012, the space research and education communities and large parts of NASA and other federal research agencies are similarly unaware of the powerful opportunities that the new reusable suborbital vehicles can offer for education and for research. Today's analogies to V-2s in 1946 are strong. Early adopters like myself see transformational promise in these vehicles, primarily because they offer frequent access to space at low cost. Indeed, within a few years, this industry is likely to provide the capability to fly hundreds to perhaps thousands of experiments annually, and to do so at typical payload launch costs that are 10 times or more lower than to $1 to $2 million present-day sounding rocket costs. These vehicles also offer other important benefits. For example, gentler rides for payloads than on suborbital sounding rockets, reducing design costs. The development of market-driven, simple, rapid payload safety integration processes that lower barriers to entry for scientists and universities and corporations. The opportunity to fly larger payloads than we could normally fly on a sounding rocket, reduced experiment waiting times to flight owing to the high flight rates, and very importantly, the opportunity to fly researchers and educators with their payloads. This capability is another game changer that will reduce experiment development costs and increase experiment reliability by eliminating the need for expensive experiment automation that has for too long been commonplace in space, as a substitute for the researcher or the educator being able to be there themselves, as in most scientific disciplines. These new vehicles offer something else that is also both new and revolutionary. That is the routine stepping stone capability to try out and develop research players and experimental techniques at low cost before they are brought up to the International Space Station. Just as in the minor leagues in baseball, we try out players and techniques before advancing them to the majors. As a result of these numerous attractive attributes, I expect broad demand for commercial reusable suborbital vehicles in the following areas: upper atmospheric research, space life sciences, technology testing for spaceflight, microgravity science, auroral, ionospheric, and space weather research, and in education and public outreach. As early evidence for the demand for these vehicles and what they are likely to generate in that demand, I point out that the number of scientists attending next-generation suborbital researchers conferences has doubled in the past 2 years, from about 200 in 2010 to over 400 this year. Researchers and educators are already voting with their feet. What these communities could use now are more funding opportunities with NASA and other agencies to exploit the coming capabilities of these vehicles. And finally, let me say that the primary regulatory uncertainties that I foresee for these new vehicles are those that might limit their ability to achieve high flight rates at low costs and to fly researchers and educators on those flights. I urge you to minimize these and other regulatory burdens on this new and highly promising American industry, and I thank you for your time and for inviting my views.
Thank you. I now recognize our next witness, Mr. Whitesides, for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Mr. Chairman, Congresswoman Edwards, and members of the subcommittee, I'm honored to be here today. Virgin Galactic's goal is to become the world's first commercial space line. We've invested hundreds of millions of dollars into this business and into the American economy. Our prime contractor, Scaled Composites, has constructed our first space vehicles and is currently flight testing them as we prepare for commercial service. Our manufacturing joint venture, the Spaceship Company, is hard at work building our second vehicle set. Overall, this project has directly or indirectly employed over 1,000 people in the United States since its inception. As I continue my testimony, Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to share some video footage of our vehicles in flight taken over California's Mojave Air and Spaceport and New Mexico's Spaceport America. Virgin Galactic was founded in 2004 to commercialize the technologies demonstrated by Spaceship One, the first privately built vehicle to safely carry human beings into space. When it landed, it not only earned the $10 million NSREX prize and a spot in the Air and Space Museum, it also served as evidence that private entities are capable of building and operating spaceships that can carry humans both safely and affordably. To date, Mr. Chairman, we've accepted $70 million in deposits, representing over $100 million in future business. Those financials are important, but so is a different measurement. As of last week, we've accepted deposits from 536 individuals, which is more than the total number of people who have ever gone to space. We anticipate flying that many people within our first year or two of commercial service. Our system is proving to be an attractive platform for researchers and educators. Already, we've accepted deposits from several customers in these areas, including universities as well as research institutions, and from NASA itself. With a spacious cabin, relatively gentle gravity loads, frequent flights, affordable pricing, and a longer period of microgravity than many other platforms, we will offer an important tool to help innovators conduct significant science, advance technology, and educate and inspire the next generation. We commend Congress and NASA for creating NASA's Flight Opportunities Program, which is playing a critical role in ensuring that experiments are ready to fly as soon as the spaceships themselves are in service. As we prepare for commercial service, staff at both Virgin Galactic and Scaled Composites have been interacting with the FAA, and in particular the Office of Commercial Space Transportation, or AST, for many years. We believe that the FAA, and specifically AST, are responsibly discharging their legislative accountabilities concerning suborbital spaceflight. Businesses like ours have a clear imperative to do all that we can to responsibly manage the risks associated with operating our vehicles. In our case, many of our staff, including myself, will fly on our spaceship before any member of the paying public, and our founder, Richard Branson, will be on our first commercial flight. Our team includes a number of professionals with deep expertise in safely operating aerospace vehicles. This includes our Vice President of Operations, Mike Moses, who was responsible for the preparation and launch of the Space Shuttle's final 12 missions. Mike and other members of our team interact with AST on a regular basis, allowing for frank two-way exchanges of information. In 2004, Congress determined that 8 years of real flight data was a reasonable amount of time for a regulatory learning period, a value which the suborbital industry supported then and continues to support today. When it passed the most recent FAA authorization bill, the House of Representatives renewed that 8-year period. The conference bill extended the learning period for the scope of the FAA authorization itself, which runs until late 2015. We are pleased and appreciative that Congress took this action and look forward to working with both bodies of the legislature on the duration of this period in the next Congress. Moving forward, the regulatory uncertainty that has the biggest potential impact on our business is the concern that the learning period for our suborbital operations might be reduced. Already, we are faced with the prospect that soon after we go into commercial operations, rules and regulations may change substantially, potentially disrupting those operations in our business. A stable regulatory environment is the best way to preserve America's status as the world leader for suborbital spaceflight. In closing, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. As we all remember Sally Ride this week, an American hero and a pioneer who opened the space frontier to women, Virgin Galactic seeks to build on her legacy by opening the space frontier to all. I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you. I now recognize our next witness, Mr. Alexander, for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Palazzo, Congresswoman Edwards, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify this afternoon on behalf of Blue Origin. We appreciate the committee's longstanding support of the development of space and commercial human spaceflight. Blue Origin was founded in 2000 by Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon.com, with the sole purpose of developing technologies and vehicles to enable human access to space at dramatically lower cost and increased reliability. The ultimate goal is to enable more people to fly in space to be able to do more things, whether for science, exploration, or simply adventure travel. We believe in incremental development, beginning with suborbital vehicles before moving on to orbital systems. Our New Shepard suborbital system will take 3 or more astronauts to 100 kilometers altitude, where they will experience several minutes of microgravity, be able to see the darkness of space, and view the curvature of the Earth. Key elements of this suborbital architecture: a reusable vehicle with vertical takeoff, vertical landing rocket, a separable crew capsule with a pusher escape system, are also key elements of our orbital architecture, designed to take people to low Earth orbit and the International Space Station. Let me now address the markets for suborbital spaceflight. First, we believe that people are the game-changing element for spaceflight. We can't tell you all the activities that people will do in space, but we are certain the number of people and activities will increase greatly as the cost comes down and safety improves. Research and science is a valuable secondary market. We are poised to offer the research community flexible, repeated access to space on dramatically accelerated timelines for a fraction of the cost. Research tools once limited to a few investigators will be within reach of a wide array of federal agencies, industry, and even college and high school students. These suborbital systems have significant promise for STEM education for our nation's youth. With routine flights, the ability for schools to tuck small, untended experiments and payloads along for the ride is within reach, giving hands-on space experience previously unimaginable. Other markets for suborbital spaceflight are likely to be developed that we cannot yet imagine. Who would have thought that 10 years ago there would be over 500,000 apps for something called a smartphone? The barrier to entry to develop an app is minimal. There's no need to spend billions on developing the network or the phone itself. Similarly, scientists, school kids, and others can develop apps for suborbital spaceflight at little to no upfront cost compared to traditional spaceflight activities. The sky is truly the limit. Let me now address the regulatory framework. Commercial spaceflight is in its infancy, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach to regulation. Each company is developing a different system. Blue has a vertical takeoff, vertical landing vehicle with a capsule that returns under parachute. Others have vehicles with wings and wheels. What is appropriate for one type of vehicle may not be appropriate for others. The current question of how and when the FAA will regulate the safety of spaceflight participants is the greatest uncertainty affecting the development of this industry. I want to take this opportunity to thank you for the passage last year of an extension of the learning period to the full 8 years from the date of the first paying passenger flight, as per the original intent of the CSLAA. While the final bill extended this only until October 2015, we appreciate Congress's recognition that the learning period serves a valuable purpose and will work with you to extend the learning period to at least 8 years or longer. We believe the best path forward would be to continue the informed consent approach indefinitely, allowing individuals to make their own decisions on how best to manage their own safety and the inherent challenges of spaceflight. Regarding our interaction with the FAA and the development of regulations, there are two primary ways in which we interact with the FAA. The first is through the formal NPRM regulatory process. The second is through our individual applications for permits and licenses and FAA oversight of our flight activity. And we have found that, on the whole, both have worked well. The FAA has shown itself receptive to real-world input as data is being gathered and flight activities continue. We look forward to the FAA's planned monthly telecons as an opportunity for dialogue between the FAA and industry, allowing for open and frank discussions about technical design and safety. In conclusion, we believe suborbital spaceflight offers great promise and opportunity for the nation's economy, scientific research, and STEM education. As private commercial developers, we are not looking just to government, but are investing private funds to enable this bright future. NASA and other government agencies can capitalize on this private investment and take full advantage of these new capabilities. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I now recognize our next witness, Mr. Nelson, for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Palazzo, Congresswoman Edwards, and members of the subcommittee. And thank you for this opportunity to speak about the reusable suborbital markets and how this industry can be a catalyst for new jobs and economic growth given an efficient government and an appropriate regulatory stance. It is my belief that suborbital reusable launch vehicles are critical to America's future innovation-led economy, the education of our children, and our national security, because reusability is the transformative step needed for affordable and responsive space access, which is an enabler of these noble objectives. XCOR's long-term vision of the future space industry starts with the premise that there are robust opportunities for self-sustaining, profitable space businesses in low Earth orbit and near-Earth resource exploration. But numerous challenges must be solved to realize this vision, and failures will occur along the way. But free of regulatory uncertainty and excessive constraints, government can enable industry to once again embrace the risk-taking spirit that built our country. The potential payoff is similar to the railroads, the air transportation system, or the internet. In other words, the next great American-led trillion-dollar enterprise, the commercial space enterprise. The first technical hurdles to overcome are fully reusable propulsion systems and thermal protection systems, and we believe suborbital RLVs are the ideal proving ground for these technologies. This has been XCOR's focus for over 12 years, and it will continue. XCOR was founded by individuals who dreamt of going to space and pursued their dreams, giving up lucrative jobs in a lot nicer places than Mojave. In 1999, after they were laid off from an entrepreneurial rocket venture, they chose to follow the ethos that Henry David Thoreau expressed when he said, "Go confidently in the direction of your dreams and live the life you have imagined." And in so doing, have arguably created one of the most innovative and determined aerospace companies the U.S. has seen in the last 50 years. We XCORians have pursued the American dream without benefit of great personal wealth, but with significant determination and character. And we're now building reusable rocket engines for ourselves and others, like United Launch Alliance, and we're building the Lynx reusable suborbital vehicle that is scheduled to start flight test in the new year. In 2 years, XCOR and our partners have sold over 200 flights on the Lynx, and 50 of these sales have come in the last 3 months, demonstrating increasing sales velocity as we near first flight and the incumbent network effects you see in most markets. Our typical buyers have net investable assets of $1 to $2 million or more, but many less wealthy enthusiasts are buying also, and many people are buying multiple flights. Industry and the research community are also buyers, and we project these markets to eventually surpass the personal spaceflight markets. For over 10 years, XCOR has played a leading role within the industry by actively collaborating with the FAA. For example, we helped create the definition of suborbital rocket, was instrumental in crafting and leading the campaign to pass the first Commercial Space Launch Amendments Act in 2004. And XCOR has direct and productive contacts with FAA AST staff in Southern California, Florida, Washington, D.C., and elsewhere. We believe that Congress should enable the FAA to move more staff into the field where operations are occurring so that we can facilitate the improvement in safety. In earlier testimony, you heard others speak of the 8-year learning period, and we too support the restoration of the full learning period starting with the first commercial suborbital human spaceflight for revenue. At the same time, XCOR strongly supports the new FAA initiative to use its existing authority to engage with industry on safety concerns, experiences, and best practices. We are gravely concerned with the potential expiration of the learning period because this could lead to unfettered regulation based on paper analysis and speculation rather than actual flight data and experience. Recent statements by at least one senior elected official have suggested that the current licensing regime may be repealed in the final months of this Congress. And any sudden such changes or reliance on speculative regulations would have a chilling effect on the industry and the thousands of jobs we represent collectively and the jobs we plan on creating in the near future. So such a change would also cripple our chances to be competitive internationally. The industry and FAA have been successful in persuading foreign governments to consider adopting the U.S. system of regulation, licensing and informed consent. Suddenly changing from this environment to a speculatory regulatory regime will cause countries to forego the adoption of the U.S. system and create local rules, and local rules can create an uneven playing field for us in those foreign markets, impacting jobs in various states represented by the members of the committee. Another impediment to export markets is U.S. designed and built manned suborbital ROVs is the ITAR. There's strong international interest and demonstrated demand for suborbital ROVs. However, ITAR causes inherent uncertainty with customers, which inhibit U.S. job creation. We encourage the subcommittee to take a leadership role to explicitly identify manned suborbital ROVs as a commerce control list item and open up the free world to U.S. commercial space products, services, and competitors. I thank the committee for the opportunity to present these thoughts for the record, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. I now recognize our final witness, Dr. McCandless, for 5 minutes to present his testimony.
Mr. Chairman, Congresswoman Edwards, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to answer your questions on suborbital research investigations regarding decision metrics, infrastructure and capability requirements, student involvement, and future directions for suborbital research. Regarding the questions on decision metrics, I'd like to point out that scientific peer review panels are assembled for NASA, are assembled by each of the 4 science divisions, geospace, heliophysics, planetary, and astrophysics, to conduct research from suborbital platforms. Panels look for some way cool advancement of their scientific capabilities that is enabled by some new technology, and they seek to build a technically adept workforce. Relevance to overall NASA strategic plan is a requirement. For a heliophysics investigation, it might be a new high-resolution imager, or for astrophysics, it might be a device that can image planets about nearby stars. My own work, we're building a new high-efficiency far-ultraviolet spectrograph that is 6 times more sensitive than anything we've flown before and can observe more than 40 targets at once in the area of the size of the moon. To pass muster of a highly oversubscribed peer review, there has to be some capability of the chosen vehicle, usually the altitude, which provides the only way to do the research. If you can do it from the ground, you're not going to fly it on a sounding rocket. Regarding suborbital infrastructure and capabilities, the commercially operated launch provider, NASROC, run by Orbital Sciences, with oversight from the NASA Sounding Rocket Project Office, provides a stable of 11 different launch vehicles to experimenters picked by peer review. They also provide a host of very mature modular subsystems to provide missile flight safety, D-spin and separation, high-speed telemetry, attitude control, recovery, fine pointing, and command uplink for real-time control of the payload. Experimenters have access to full integration and test facilities at Wallops in Virginia, including ground stations, shaker tables, spin balance, and moments of inertia measurements. In addition, the NASROC Sounding Rocket Project Office hosts project management reviews, and all these things are necessary to ensure that things will be carried out safely. The message is one size doesn't fit all, as we heard earlier. Some experimenters want to fly as high and as long as they can. Some want to fly tailored trajectories at specific altitudes. It all depends on the science. For our observations, I require a vehicle that will provide 400 seconds of time above 100 kilometers with a precision real-time pointing system so the student can make target adjustments during flight. Student participation in sounding rocket research is a long-standing hallmark of the program. Some would argue it's the most important product. Students become an integral part of the science and technology they develop. They work in an apprentice-mentor relationship with senior researchers, where much know-how is passed on in an oral form from one generation to the next, much like a guild of old spaceship builders. And there's the slide of an example. In our astrophysics program, we emphasize hands-on experience with optics, mechanics, electricity, magnetism, vacuum systems, computer program, data acquisitions, design, testing, calibration, integration, troubleshooting, mission planning, communication, and publication of results. Within the short tenure of a graduate student, they become scientists with a fundamental regard for systems engineering and are highly prized by the aerospace community. Many of the PhD and undergraduate students go on to fill key roles in the development of instrumentation for a host of space-based missions. However, as of late, the number of sounding rocket students receiving PhDs has fallen, as the displayed example shows. It is directly correlated with the decreasing number of launch opportunities over the past 40 years and symptomatic of a reduced production of technically adept leadership. Regarding future challenges and opportunities, the challenge for developing reusable suborbital vehicles as meaningful research platforms will be to identify those appropriate niche markets, both commercial and scientific, where a human-in-the-loop or an in-situ access module provides some unique capability that will pass muster of the peer review. From my perspective, the current crop of reusable vehicles on the books falls well short of our requirements. My astrophysics sounding rocket colleagues and I agree that generating new funding opportunities to advance the core capabilities of the expendable sounding rocket community are more likely to generate meaningful scientific, technical, and programmatic impact for future space-based missions run by NASA, DoD, and even private concerns. There is a logarithmic gap in the launch portfolio between $3 million it costs to develop a sounding rocket and $200 million it costs to launch an Explorer mission. The missing piece is a commercial launch capability in the $10 million range that is capable of placing 250 to 500 kilograms into low Earth orbit, such as the Virgin Galactic Launcher 1 or the Falcon 1 from SpaceX. Establishing this capability can reduce risk and cost for future Explorer and flagship missions through reduced development times for increasing technology readiness levels, and most importantly, by expanding the technically adept workforce. There's no substitute for experience. Expanding the suborbital program and filling the logarithmic gap in the launch portfolio is key to maintaining our leadership in space science. Thank you.
Thank you, and I thank the panel for their testimony. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. My first question is pretty much a two-part question. It's going to be directed to Mr. Whitesides, Mr. Alexander, and Mr. Nelson. How does the SRV industry currently collaborate with the Federal Aviation Administration in developing draft guidance for test flights and current operations? And what is the proper role for industry in developing future regulations? Yeah.
Sorry, I beat you to the punch. Go for it. No, you go. George and I talk on so many panels together. I think we could probably finish our sentences a lot of time. So we collaborate with the FAA on draft test flight processes and procedures, much as the rest of the industry. It's important for us to have the integration of local staff so they can understand what we're planning to do. There's regular meetings, and especially through the licensing process, they want to understand how our vehicle is built and designed, as well as how we intend on testing it. So, George?
I think I'd like to add that, we've got a very good working relationship with the FAA. Their staff are knowledgeable, but what they need is access to our plans and procedures, and that comes through that regulatory interaction, through the process of applying for experimental permits and licenses, and through the oversight of the activities that are regulated by the FAA. That interaction is the most important piece in terms of both understanding from industry's side how things are operated, but for the FAA to understand, what's going on in the industry, such that the industry provides a real education opportunity for them to see what's really going on. So the back and forth in order to develop regulations later, to develop draft guidance, to develop test procedures and things like that, they need to see what's actually going on in industry, and it's through that application process that they get that back and forth. We do think that the FAA is setting up a monthly telecon to have a dialogue with industry. That's going to be another opportunity for industry collectively to interact with the FAA to talk about technical details. We think that that's going to be very valuable as well.
Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, leave it with them.
Yeah. Nothing to add. Thank you. And this is pretty much for all y'all again, so maybe y'all decide who's going to go first. When will the companies begin commercial operations, and what type of flights will be the first to produce revenue for your company?
Why don't I start? Mr. Chairman, our goal is to start powered flight by roughly the end of the year and to go into commercial operation by the end of 2013. So we're looking at roughly an 18-month time frame for the start of commercial operations. We've always baselined starting flying with commercial customers, with our customers who've in some cases been waiting to fly for several years. We have recently talked about inserting some of the NASA payloads that we've been contracted to fly earlier on. So that's in discussion, but our baseline is to start with our commercial customers.
We're still in the development phase for our new Shepherd suborbital flight system, and as we get deeper into our flight test program, we'll start accepting reservations and then having plans for when we will first fly. We do think that passengers and scientific research will be the first revenue generating activities.
We hope to commence our flight test program the end of this year or early next year, with a flight test program that would end at late 2013 if things go as planned. So we'll be at the end of 2013 flying paying participants. We do expect that there will be some science missions that are unmanned, that are automated, that could be flown potentially earlier than that as well.
Ms. Christensen, your forecast paint a rosy picture for the future of this industry. Can you tell the committee why we should believe there's a real market out there for these vehicles? And what is your level of confidence in the demand forecast?
Mr. Chairman, my objective in characterizing the industry, my team's objective, has been to be as data-driven and accurate as possible. We're an independent firm. Our business model is to provide rigorous analysis. We've released a 100-page report that identifies the many dynamics of the market that we identified, the uncertainties, the assumptions that we've made, and where those assumptions might vary. I'll note that our findings are very much aligned with a broad data set derived from interviews and research, and we've laid that out as fully as possible.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I now recognize Ms. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, I've both been a healthy skeptic of the industry and the potential, but also quite curious, and I haven't made it any great secret that I'd want to be one of those 530. I want to be number 537 if there's room. It does seem to me that on a congressional salary, it's highly unlikely that I could afford the deposit. But it raises a question, Ms. Christensen, about the profile of the individuals who want to leave those deposits and fill out this industry, because they're clearly high net worth individuals because they have the financial capacity for that. But it seems to me that, we're so accustomed to getting on boats and planes in our automobiles, and there's a comfort level attached to that. And this is somewhat different and experimental. And so what happens with those individuals that you think will fill out the industry if the flight itself doesn't kind of meet that comfort zone for people who are not necessarily scientists and researchers, but, you know, they just want to experiment a little bit?
We identified that question of how consumers, how spaceflight participants will actually respond to the experience as one of the major uncertainties that we're looking at. I can tell you that based on the survey that we did, and we focused on high net worth individuals, most of those individuals viewed spaceflight as either extremely or somewhat inherently risky. And many of the individuals that were interested in taking suborbital flights held that view as well. So to the extent that that speaks to that question, that population does appear to have a sense that that's part of the, and we also in our survey articulated to them elements of the experience such as what it might be like, both the positive and the, you know, you might feel ill. And so that was part of the process of informing survey respondents in getting their answers.
And Mr. Whitesides, if you could help me understand in any of these sort of risky behaviors, there's a potential that there's a mishap that's going to happen. I mean, that happens with cars. And I wonder if your company or others have established any plan as to how you'll conduct investigations or determine root causes should there be a mishap. And what do you think the relative role of the federal government should be in the event of such an occurrence? And I think, for example, of an agency like the National Transportation Safety Board, is that something in terms of the federal government that we have to stand up to have some capacity for investigation that it doesn't now have with respect to space flight? And I know that there is there clearly is an expression of concern about a regulatory environment that might constrain development, but what is the right level of regulation that the federal government has to engage itself in order to oversee what is, in essence, a consumer-driven market?
To start with the first question, Congresswoman, I think it's a great question, and the answer, I think, is that in terms of mishaps, it depends on the type of mishap. So for very serious mishaps, the NTSB, I believe, will work with AST, and NTSB has assigned an investigator who is becoming proficient in essentially our sector. He's come out to Mojave. He's met with many of our companies, and I think I speak only for myself, but I view him as really a very highly skilled individual who seems to understand the issues. So that engagement has begun. I think AST also has its own set of plans, and for a serious mishap, we, I think, would obviously defer to the NTSB's leadership of that investigation. For other mishaps, you know, which frankly occur, lesser mishaps, you know, you learn things continually through the flight test program. Some of those, you know, I think the flight test team can handle themselves. You know, they'll just learn something. It's a minor issue. And that's the point of flight test, is to improve the vehicles to the point that we're comfortable flying customers. Part of the reason that we have certainly taken, you know, many years to prepare these vehicles is because we've been in flight test for years. And we will not fly people on these vehicles until we feel comfortable that it is the time to do so. I think in terms of your last question, I think the government, and in particular the Science Committee, who essentially crafted the 2004 amendment to the CSLAA, developed the right posture for this moment of time. And I think you know, we obviously support that at this time.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask a final question of Dr. McCandless, and it actually has to do with the scientific environment. It's tough for me to imagine how you balance having a sort of sterile, more laboratory environment with also commercial passengers that satisfies the needs that scientists have to do research. Is that a concern of yours?
Yes. For our own purposes, we require to be outside the cabin. So being inside the cabin would not be where I'd want to be. I mean, we conduct research essentially in situ. So it's incompatible, really, with the human spaceflight aspect.
Before moving on, if I could just ask Ms. Christensen again on part 2 of my question on your industry forecast, what is your level of confidence in the demand forecast?
My level of confidence is strong in our baseline forecast. We built that up using a very substantial array of data through a critical lens. There are certainly uncertainties embedded within that, ranging from consumer response to research outcomes and so on. But just as a calibration note, I'll say that our baseline of about 4,500 seat equivalents, you can look at that in light of the number of sold reservations to date, which is about 925. So that as a calibration point, I think, is indicative of that as a realistic forecast.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me direct a couple of questions to Mr. Whitesides, Mr. Alexander, and Mr. Nelson. You all mentioned a while ago, Mr. Whitesides, for Virgin Galactic, that you expect to be in commercial operations in about a year and a half. Mr. Nelson, you said the same thing about X-Core. Mr. Alexander, you didn't give a specific time, but I gather you're about a year behind that. Are you 2.5, 3 years away from commercial operations?
I'd say we are later than what you heard from the others, yes.
Okay. And Mr. Whiteside, you had over 500 deposits, I think. Mr. Nelson, over 200. And Mr. Alexander, you were on the cusp of getting them. I guess my first question is this. In regard to your revenues, what percentage of your revenues do you think or expect or project to come from paid passengers versus scientific research? Mr. Whiteside?
Congressman, I believe that certainly the initial bulk of the market, I think, is in the individuals.
Paid passengers, okay.
Yeah, for us at least.
Mr. Alexander?
I would agree with that, that people is the real market. We believe that the research market is secondary, but we are likely to fly research activities before we fly people.
Okay. Mr. Nelson?
Initially, we see the participant market being the driver. However, we do see the research market, especially industrial research, surpassing that market, we feel, 4 or 5 years in, as the value proposition is known and becomes known to industrial players outside the government market.
Okay. Now, you have 2 passengers. I think Mr. Alexander has 3. Mr. Alexander has 3. Mr. Whiteside's 8. 2 are pilots, I think, and of the 2, Mr. Nelson with X-Core, 1 is a pilot. I guess on economy of scale, it looks like that Virgin Galactic is going to have more revenue just on the basis of, I guess, more passengers. But when do you project to make a profit, Mr. Whitesides?
We expect to be cash flow positive within about a year of the start of commercial operations.
Okay, good. And Mr. Nelson?
On a GAAP basis, as well as regular accounting, we were profitable last year. We have additional revenue streams from other parts of our business. We hope that occurs again this year.
But as far as commercial space?
Commercial space, we expect in the first 12 months to be profitable.
Good. I hope you were right and wish you well in that regard. Let me go to the FAA for a minute. You answered a question a while ago about your relationship with the FAA, but my question is this. What FAA regulations are of most concern to you? Now, Mr. Whiteside, you sounded like a while ago that you were okay with the current regulations. You were worried about the future new changes in regulations. But in general, what regulations, present or future, are of most concern to you, Mr. Whitesides?
Congressman, you captured it exactly. In fact, we believe that the current regulatory posture of AST is a good one, and our preference would be to maintain the original 8-year intention of Congress.
Okay, great. Mr. Alexander?
We completely agree. We believe that the informed consent approach that this committee originated in 2004 really allows the individual to make the choice as to what level of safety or what level of risk they want to accept, just as someone who climbs a mountain has a choice of whether to do that or not.
Okay. Mr. Nelson?
I have nothing more to add. They said it perfectly.
Last quick question is this. Oh, is my time up? It is not up. Last quick question is this. How do you view yourselves, the three of you all, who are about to engage in commercial operations? Do you see yourself as competitors, as rivals? And if you see yourself as rivals, do you also see that each of you in your own way is adding sort of a value added to the enterprise and to the overall commercial operations in space? And just to reverse order, Mr. Nelson first.
I've been asked this question before, Congressman, and the current stage we're in is co-opetition. We are competitors, but we also have to cooperate. It's a very early stage of the industry, and so things like regulatory frameworks and this sort of thing, we're in dialogue with through the Commercial Spaceflight Federation and the FAA. But yes, certainly this is a competition, but we have very different value propositions, very different experiences. Just like going to Disney or someplace where you have 6 roller coasters, you want to ride all 6 roller coasters, and we're seeing that with our customer base.
So that's the value added, strength in numbers, maybe.
Absolutely, and certainly I've said many times that we're very happy that Sir Richard Branson stepped into this marketplace because to the public face, that was a wonderful thing. It made it acceptable to say, I want to fly to space.
Okay, my time is up, but Mr. Whitesides, real briefly, if you can give your view of that.
I think on a personal basis, we view each other as brothers in arms, doing historic work, and obviously once we go into commercial operation, then we'll compete like any good capitalists.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrbacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, that last question was really pretty interesting, Lamar. Nobody said robber baron or bureaucrat, so I'm glad to hear that those two mindsets has not dominated your industry. I think it's fascinating that your industry now is being heralded as a potential $1 trillion, new $1 trillion enterprise for the future. It wasn't that way back in 2004 when we were working on the Commercial Space Act. And let me note that informed consent was just mentioned. That getting that principle established for this industry was a horrendous task. I mean, this Congress that was an issue that almost prevented the development of this new $1 trillion commercial industry. And it took a lot to get our colleagues to accept that. There were people who were skeptical about it. And by the way, I don't think you're skeptical. I think that you're going to be the first one on that rocket. I know I'm not skeptical, but I wouldn't go up there on that with one of those rockets. I'll stay on my surfboard. Thank you. About your industry, how much of your industry is based on technology that was developed for the American space program, and how much of it is new that you are putting into this program yourself? How much new technology is coming from your enterprise? How much was it is based on things that the government developed for NASA over the years?
From an X-Corps perspective, the key parts of our technology we developed ourselves, and in fact, we've relied much more on the automotive industrial base to make the engines fully reusable and to be able to last thousands and thousands of rocket flights. Now, granted, we all stand on the shoulders of great individuals and people and the organization of NASA, but some of the core key technological developments were done internally
And the real things that makes this that makes your industry possible have actually been developed without a direct federal subsidy. Is that correct? Or I'm not saying running the business, but in terms of developing the shape of your craft and the design and the whole concept, or am I wrong there?
You're correct, sir. Certainly in our case, our technology is primarily based off the Spaceship One program, which was financed by Paul Allen. And to date, our entire program has been privately financed.
So we have a tremendous new industry that basically has emerged based on the enterprise and the creativity of a group of profit-seeking entrepreneurs, as compared to, for example, I understand there was very little government involvement in your enterprise, but there was a lot of government involvement in the Volt, wasn't there? The recent car And so we're lucky we didn't have the government having the same kind of influence on your industry that it had on the development of of that type of automobile. Let me ask you a little bit about suborbital space and some of the challenges that you face. I see there's technical challenges which you're moving forward on. We're trying to handle the regulatory challenges now. And this is just as big a hurdle as the technology challenges. And then the financial and the market challenges are things that you're going to have to face as entrepreneurs, as any other businessmen. But right now, if we don't have the right type of regulatory and don't continue with some of the leeway that we gave you in the Commercial Space Act of 2004, would you say that that would be a death blow to your industry, or would this just be a setback, or might it be positive?
I appreciate the question. I think if we were to have imposed today's aviation regulatory environment on the Wright brothers, they never would have gotten off the ground. And that is the big fear, that we will take all the lessons learned, but take them in the wrong way and impose strict regulations that don't take into account the changing way of doing human spaceflight that this industry represents.
That was a very good answer. I've got a couple seconds left, and I'd just like to note that in 2 hours, if your industry is successful, in about 2 hours we can be on the opposite side of the world. We can have you, eventually we're going to have a system which can deliver passengers to the other side of the world in 2 hours, or packages. That seems to me to be something that has tremendous potential for benefit. It also will lead to cheaper, it may lead us to a cheaper, as you've already mentioned, way of delivering satellites into orbit. And I wonder if we all remember that Lindbergh got a contract for delivering the mail, and eventually it helped him then as a private operation to build a plane that went across the Atlantic. And so there's just a great deal of exciting things that lie ahead for your industry, and we're counting on you, but we need you back here to make sure that we know what we need to do so we're not in the way. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. And for the panel's information, we're going to go into a second round of questions. Everybody's agreeable to that? Okay. Dr. Stern, I know you've been quiet over there, so we got one just for you. What is the necessary price point at which K through 12 STEM educators could begin to use SRVs in their curriculum?
Well, that's a great question. As you know, the primary barrier to schools using spaceflight have been the long time it takes to fly things. A lot of things that happen in the shuttle program, for example, a sixth grade class would start it and they'd be in college by the time some other sixth grader was carrying it out. And then the prices were so high that it just wasn't within reach of the normal school system. In these vehicles, however, the price points are quite low. If you take, for example, George's company's cost of $200,000 to fly an individual, you say I want to fly a shoebox-sized experiment, say it weighs a pound for a class, then that ratio of $200,000 to 1 pound would cost, it's about $1,000, which is quite affordable. A school could have a car wash, a bake sale, what have you, and afford to have the students fly something in space. And that's really revolutionary in terms of the access, and that's one of the reasons that educators are so excited about this industry, is because they're going to get access to space on rapid timescales and at costs they can afford.
How soon do you think we'll actually see secondary students engaging in these types of scientific projects?
I think you'll see that very shortly after the commencement of commercial activities, but it's really up to the individual companies to make their case to the school systems around the country that they're open for business.
I mean, because it's just so important, especially kids at that age, to get them excited about science, technology, engineering, math. So hopefully they'll just embrace that dream and carry it out and make a career out of it, which will also help us become more competitive with some of our, I guess, global competitors. And my next question is for Dr. Stern and Dr. McCandless. How will research universities benefit from these new vehicles, and could we see the number of undergraduate students that fly their own experiments grow as a result of cheaper options for suborbital flights?
The more flights you have, the more opportunities you have. The question will become, where will the funds come from to build the instrumentation? The cost of launch is really a small part of what it costs to develop a scientific instrument and fly it on a launch vehicle. So, you know, there's costs associated with engineering, design, development, testing, and then ultimately integration with the payload. So who's going to bear those costs? That's the question.
Mr. Chairman, if I might add, I think we have to wrap our heads around a different way of doing business when we think about suborbital. Just like mainframe computing, spaceflight has been very rare since its inception. And just like PC computing, it's about to become routine. So when Steve and his colleagues and individuals in my community typically think about spaceflight, we think about inventing a new experiment. Well, that's not the way to think about it in suborbital. You want to think about an individual experiment that, is, in an educational sense, does a good job, flying again and again and again, being handed from school to school to school every day of the year, so that you divide that cost by 365 days in the year, or by many school systems, all performing the same experiment the way that we all used to do classic physics experiments as undergraduates. And we didn't invent new experiments, we carried out cookbook. And in that mold, where private industry develops or universities develop curriculum experiments that get handed from student to student so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel and you can take advantage of these low price points for the launch, then we can really see this kind of space access revolution, which I think is upon us.
I think most educators would say that cookbook experiments have their place in an educational environment, but it's not going to advance the science.
I now recognize Ms. Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nelson, in your written testimony, you advocate for a full 8 years of data gathering before, and I quote, unfettered regulation may begin. Does that mean also that space participants would continue in this period to fly under informed consent? Some say that's fly at your own risk, you said it. And I recognize the need for the industry to kind of get its sea legs, and we're not anywhere near yet the level of experience achieved in aviation, but it seems that this is a pretty lengthy time. What do you hope to gain, and what experience do you hope to gain over the 8 years of licensed flights, and why would a lesser time period not provide similar results?
Thank you, Congresswoman. It's a very good question. Between the Wright brothers' first flight and the introduction of the DC-3, which is recognized as the sort of breakthrough safety vehicle, there was approximately 30 years of experience gained with hundreds of different types of aircraft, systems, engines, flight environments, customer types, and businesses. We see that when even though technology now expands and develops quicker, we still need a period of time to operate and to practice and to learn. And as we better understand how we will make these vehicles as safe as we can and still remain economically viable, we need to take that time. To answer your question about after the 8-year learning period, and we start to have the beginning of a regulatory environment with certification standards, we still want to fly with under informed consent. We think it should continue indefinitely, as my colleague to my right mentioned. The reason for that is because in order to have a statistically significant database to go through the assured safety, 10 to the minus 6 safety levels that are normally associated with even general aviation, you need thousands and thousands and thousands of flights. And it's important for us to have that experience. Thank you.
Thanks. Just want to, remind us all that nobody paid to go on the Wright brothers flights. I recall that as part of the history books. And I wonder, Dr. McCandless, I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, which is this question of whether you really do need for real science. And I'm not talking about, not that the high school scientists for an education purpose aren't, really great, but I'm talking about our PhD scientists at Johns Hopkins and our other research institutions, the kind of environment that you need in order to perform the science that you could then have peer-reviewed. The environment that's been described on the vehicles that we're talking about, do you think that that is at a projected to be at a capacity where you would be able to do that kind of experimentation, developing instrumentation that's really sensitive in an environment that also contain human payloads or human people?
Yeah,
right?
It will depend upon the type of science that you're talking about. Now, for things like physiological research to see whether or not people will be able to keep their lunch down.
I'm talking about high, sort of really high technology instrumentation.
Right. For our own purposes, for say NASA, science programs where we have strategic plans that we're trying to advance and discover secrets of the universe, for lack of a better term, we require a good, strong base of researchers who are savvy and can carry out a lot of the tasks that are associated with building instruments, which, as everybody down the line here knows, is a very painful process to get everything to work all at once. There's a lot of Frankenstein moments, where you finally have it breathe life into the instrument and it lives and everyone's very happy, but there's a lot of sweat and pain that goes up to that.
I only call our attention to it because I do think it raises a question about how we're going to be able to marry the passengers that want to fly and who've left deposits with what we need to do scientifically.
Ms.
And
Edwards,
before you get there, I just wonder also if you could clarify for the record that even though you work with an NTSB partner who's on your site, NTSB does not currently have any legislative statutory authority in commercial spaceflight. Isn't that correct?
To be honest, I'm not an expert on this subject, but my impression is that if there was a mishap, I believe it has been represented to us that the NTSB would work with AST on that investigation.
I feel certain that the NTSB doesn't have any current legislative authority.
The FAA, AST, and the NTSB have an MOU jointly signed by the two parties. Whether they have statutory authority or not, I can't speak to.
Yeah. And just a couple of weeks ago, they actually did sort of an accident practice out in Mojave with NTSB, local first responders, and participants from the industry, as well as the airport and fire and rescue. So I know that they're actively engaged in the subject matter of which you speak.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, maybe there's some point at which we could actually bring the NTSB in and FAA and ask some of these questions. I mean, our witnesses, they're terrific, but they aren't in a position to answer those questions. Thank you.
I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me just note that by eliminating the burden of informed consent, what we actually did is we eliminated the weight, the unnecessary weight of having extra lawyers on every flight. And that, I think, has made a major difference and would have made a major difference in the Wright brothers as well. It isn't so much as a subsidy as it is the elimination of an unnecessary factor, especially if you consider people should be free to decide for their own selves if they take risks in their life. As my father was a Marine fighter pilot, and guess what? When he signed up, he knew exactly what the risks were, and he was willing to do it. And we not only did not eliminate, we put lawyers into the whole system of the military, because was he able to make that informed consent? Well, of course he was. When we should put a regulatory regime onto your industry as compared to other industries in the past, I would suggest that 8 years more experience in finding out what your industry is going to be all about. We don't know right now whether the suborbital space is going to lead to satellites being launched, or how far you're going to be able to take passengers, whether it's going to be a ride up and a ride down, or whether it's going to be a ride to the other side of the world. We don't know those things yet. And this is a softball question for the panel, but wouldn't it be more dangerous to put regulations in place right now before we've gathered all of the statistics on the differential type of flights that you're going to be making over this next 8 years? That's a softball question. I'm sure somebody can answer it there.
Well, I'll speak from the standpoint of the research community. And the power of these vehicles to transform our ability to do frontline research and to do education, two very different things, is in their frequency of flight. It's not that they're going somewhere new, it's that they're going there every day. So we can go to the upper atmosphere every day, or we can, for example, look at physiological changes in how people adapt to zero gravity with much larger groups of people than a few select astronauts to fly hundreds of thousands of people. It's the frequency of flight that's key, and if the regulatory environment hampers, impedes, or stifles that, then we won't get the research benefits, and you probably won't have the tourism benefits either.
Anybody else want to answer that?
In the past, I've used a hypothetical example, and I guess I should do the research on it, but we have wiring that runs by cryogenic tanks. In aircraft, you don't have wires that run by cryogenic tanks. If they were going to regulate aircraft wiring on our vehicle, that could potentially create a safety hazard. So we'd have to go through a various process to get it waived, get it changed, et cetera. But by creating regulations that we don't have experience around, then you perhaps create an environment of I just described.
I think that we should have faith in our entrepreneurs and our frontiersmen and our explorers, at least for a limited period of time, so that they can push back the frontier, and then we can come in and reach our compromises and reach our agreements as to how much regulation is needed to make sure our society functions as a whole. One last question for Mr. Stern. What type of training is necessary for researchers to fly along with their payloads into suborbital space? And are there companies that offer this type of training, or is it provided by the government or provided by these companies themselves that are providing the transportation?
Yes, sir. That's a very good question, and I'll speak from the standpoint that my firm, the Southwest Research Institute, has already invested our own money to purchase 9 spaceflight tickets on XCOR and Virgin Galactic for the purpose of research missions, early research missions not paid for by the government, but from our own funds. So we're already in the process of doing that. I'm the principal investigator of that program and therefore going through our training process. The training falls into 3 categories. The first is to understand how to operate your own scientific gear, just as you would on a sounding rocket flight, which I did many times after peer review. The second is the same kind of training that the space tourists take, just to be familiar with the environments and the cabin and the vehicles themselves. And the third kind, which I think is unique to the research community, is really to make sure that you're going to be effective in a short period of time. Time management, distraction management, et cetera. Earlier, Ms. Johnson asked a question, Ms. Edwards asked a question about the efficacy of research flights, research being done on tourist flights. And I'm sure that's going to happen in the early days. But I think that we're going to see a real market differentiation. In fact, we already worked with Virgin Galactic to buy the first charter flight, which is all researchers. And I think that that's where you'll see, just like cargo doesn't fly in the cabin with people, there are cargo flights and there are passenger flights. You'll see the development of research birds and specific research flights where everybody's down to business, and that'll be separate from honeymooners or what have you in the tourist line that are going for a peak experience.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing. This issue and this new industry is key to prosperity. It's key to national, and I would suggest that while they're working to make a buck and develop this new type of enterprise, it'll have tremendous applications that will make our country safer. We will see a technology transfer from a private company into the defense arena rather than the other way around. And so we wish them Godspeed and lots of success. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Rohrbacher. And I guess we need to start talking about how soon we have to put our CODEL request in for the most successful company with the best safety record. I do want to thank today's witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and statements from members. The witnesses are excused, and this hearing is adjourned.